Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem, B'Shem Irgendwie, Torah, like, welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Smith Shlita on Davening Mincha tefila Purim, the Purim Davening. Have the exclusive sponsoring a shir called Irgendwie Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
In the Megila Daf Yud and goes till Daf Yud Aleph, there are 14 Tanoim and Amoraim that try to find the essence, the message of Purim. Rabbi Yochanan Pasach, Pischa, Lai Parish, Mihacha, this pasuk and that pasuk. It's amazing, 14 different messages or essence of Purim. So you wonder which is the halacha l'maisa. They're all emes, which halacha l'maisa? So there's something that has to be mentioned. I think it's a mitzvah l'farsim. There's the Rambam wrote a sefer mitzvahs, and then after this he has a minyan of mitzvahs. And in between the minyan of mitzvahs and when he starts the Yara Chazaka, he has a few mitzvahs rabbanon. And if you want to see in the Frankel Rambam in the Chelik Aleph, it's page Chof Aleph, but it's very hard to find, but it's there. And he says the following: Zok the Rambam, that what's the concept? Why the Chazal mechayiv us to lay the Megila? L'haydiya l'rabim l'doros haboyim she'emes mashav tichanu ha'toira kimi goy gadol asher lo yalakim kroiv me'lov kashem olakeinu b'chol kareinu elav. The Rambam is pasking like Rav Masna, one of the 14. So what's the essence of Purim? The pasuk in Parashat Eschanon, kimi goy gadol asher lo yalakim kroiv me'lov kashem olakeinu b'chol kareinu elav. In other words, of all the 14 options, the Rambam felt the most important message of Purim is the koyach of tefila. Kimi goy gadol, that the bracha is close to them. So I was thinking it's appropriate that we should talk about it, especially we know the special koyach of tefila on Purim, the kol hapoishid yad noisim loi. So we're going to try to go in order of the Purim night and day. And Agav, I should mention, I guess it's both timely and timeless that each of these halachos that are negate to Purim are negate to a whole year as well. They're all sugyas in Bechlal in a whole year. So I guess it's timely and timeless, this sugya. I'll start with an interesting shayla. Someone was a chayla and he couldn't wait to lay the Megillah bisman. Don't forget, this year it's early. Usually Purim is if it's a Adar Sheni and you have to change the clock. So you can first start laying the Megillah at 8:15 be'erech. He had to make early Purim. He wanted to know, could he daven Maariv early with hanisim and laying the Megillah early? So it sounded like a great idea. Make an early Purim, like maybe Matzah, Chanukah will Makabel Purim, Bila Yehudim. But is there an early Purim in halacha? We have an early Shabbos, we make Kiddish. Can you make an early Purim? So Lamaisa, the Maariv, Bechlal, you should know, davening Maariv early, before Shkia, is not pashut at all, I should mention. The minhag is on Shabbos, al Tosefes Shabbos, we do it, but during the week to daven Maariv early is very much not lechatchila. Sfardim have their minhag, they daven Maariv early every night, fine, that's their minhag. But us Ashkenazim, we try to avoid the early Maariv only on Shabbos, al Tosefes Shabbos, we make early Shabbos. But b'shas atchak, the halacha is a person has to daven Maariv, he can daven after plaga mincha. So the chayra, this should not be any different regarding this chayla. Maariv should be okay. Now, what's interesting is does he say al hanisim in his davening? I'll explain why. We know every Yom Tiv has Tosefes, has an addition. Tosefes Yom Kippur's deraisa, and like most Shitas, Shabbos also, and other Yom Tovim. This one Yom Tiv, although it's deraisa, there is no Tosefes. That's the Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Yotes says that Rosh Chodesh deraisa, it's a mitzvah deraisa, and Yom Tov deraisa. In fact, the Gemara says it's hukshul l'mayadim. Uv'yam simchaschem uv'mayadechem uv'rosh yichacheichem. The Goyin wears his Shabbos hat because it's Rosh Chodesh deraisa, shet ma'aser rav. But raise a pella, and this negeya for us soon in the summer ba'aleinu l'toiva. Even though Rosh Chodesh is deraisa, there is no Tosefes Rosh Chodesh. So the Chayre should come out, if someone davens early Maariv on Rosh Chodesh, he should not say Alav Yavai. It's not yet Rosh Chodesh. And this is very negeya. In a few months, Rosh Chodesh of very often comes out on Shabbos. Now let's say that that's the case. So you make early Shabbos, and it's 8 o'clock. You're about to start Shemona Esrei, and you start wondering, do I say Alav Yavai in my Shemona Esrei? Because it's a half hour before Shkia. It's Vadayoim. Maybe you can make Shabbos, but you can't make Rosh Chodesh. And therefore the Shemona Esrei will be a little of an interesting combination. Regular Shabbos, Shemona Esrei, but no Yalav Yavai. And this is the opinion of the Imrei Emes, quoted in the Eretz Tzvi, the Kajik of Aleph, Chav Hei, and Chavav. He said, if there's no Tesefes Rosh Chodesh, how could you say Alav Yavai? However, the Eretz Tzvi himself, he says, I don't understand. There's no Tesefes Yoim. How do you make 8 o'clock into Layla Daven Maariv? Must be that if we hold that this man Maariv is b'di'eved Plaga Mincha, so why can't you say Alav Yavai? Then he says, Alomdish is far that you say it now for later. But then he says something very interesting. He says, if you're allowed to Daven Maariv early, you're allowed to say Yalav Yavai. And then he has a proof. He says, had it been true that you can't say Yalav Yavai or Rosh Chodesh of Shechal b'Shabbos when you make early Shabbos, so how could you make early Shabbos? The halach is you're allowed to say Havinenu, a short Shemona Esrei, when you have to. But a Motzoi Shabbos, when you can't put Atochen Antonu into Havinenu, then you can't make Havinenu. If you can't do it right, don't do it. How could you make early Maariv, whether it's weeknight or Shabbos? You can't say Yalav Yavai. Must be like I told you, he says, that if it's considered Laila Lagabe Maariv, Hu Adin Lagabe Rosh Chodesh, even though there's no Tesefes. Now, Lamaisa, I should add that the Imrei Emes himself seemed to have Charata, because in the Michtevei Torah, in Siman Nun Vav, he writes beferish that if you daven early, you could say Yalav Yavai in davening. Okay, wonderful. Now, this is all regarding Rosh Chodesh. How about Purim? Let's say tomorrow night someone's not well, he wants to make early Maariv. Fine. Can he say Al HaNisim in the Maariv? So this, the Eretz Tzvi doesn't discuss, but the Mishnah does. Now listen to this. In Tafrei Tzaddik Gimel, Siv Dalid, the Mechaber says that when you daven Maariv, you put in Al HaNisim. Zok the Mishnah that even if you daven early before Tzeis, you still say Al HaNisim. Oh, Mamish, how was Shaila? Zok the Sharatzin, how do I know? So listen to this. He says, since we don't find that you should make early Maariv on Purim, because you can't say Al HaNisim, must be, you could say Al HaNisim. So he was Mechavin Mamish to Eretz Tzvi. Just Eretz Tzvi was Rosh Chodesh, and he's Purim. Now I would add, they're both Mechavin to Gedoyle Kadmonim. The Maril, in the minhagim, he says, Yisbala Mincha, the Arvis, mi ba'oi joim k'moi shar leilis. That was the minhag in Ashkenaz to have an early Maariv. V'oim ba'arvis al HaNisim, but don't lay till Laila. The Mati also from the Kadmonim in the Sefer, it's Ois Tafsaf Reish Aleph also says daven Maariv early and say Al HaNisim. So we are very comfortable to say that you do say Al HaNisim in an early Maariv. Now this is as far as the Maariv. That's the Halbitzer. What about laining the Megila? So that should be a serious problem, because the pasuk that the Gemara darshans in Megillah Dav Dalid, you have to really the Ikkim mitzvahs by Yoim. But you do it at night. V'layla loy doimiyah. Laila also lay, but it has to be a din Laila. It has to be night, and that's why both the Maril and the Matei Moshe, although they sanction davening Maariv early, they're not laying the Megillah. However, there's a different kadmoin that even allows that, and that's the Trumas Hadeshin from the earliest Achrayim and Siman Kuftes. Now this is probably the most important tshuva for today, that the Trumas Hadeshin says that you could listen to Megillah from Miboy Joim, from Plag, presumably, And as far as, since according to Rabbeinu Tam, you could even daven Maariv with Krishma after Plag. So how could Megillah be worse? Megillah is at most D'Rabbanan. At night is less than day. So how could it be you can't lay Megillah miboy joim? And this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch, believe it or not, Tafrei Sadik Beis, Siv Dalid, Onus Ktsas, could hear the Megillah from Plag and Mincha on. However, this incurred the wrath of the Pri Chodosh, Kedarka very sharp. He says to Machaba, to lay in the Megillah, miboy joim, Devar of the Chuyim, don't listen to him, it has to be at night, Bar Keshemesh, if you're laying before night, le'osav v'loi klum. Why? V'layla, le'demi, it has to be Layla. However, the Bialacha, who saw both Machab and Pri Chodosh, he said, what should I tell you? I found Rishonim that you're allowed to lay me boy joim ktsas. Now if you look at the Lashon of Bialacha, he's more makel by Bein Hashmoshes. Now Bein Hashmoshes is a suffix Layla, don't forget. Bein Hashmoshes, the Mechaber says, a Chiddush Gadol, but in Tov Pei Tes Siv Beis, you could even lay Svira without a bracha b'mokum tzorech. Svira is a deraisa, but most shitas. So if you could say Svira Bein Hashmoshes, who adin the Megillah? So here we have an interesting machlokes. If you could lay Megillah early, Meir for sure with hanisim. Megillah, I could only say if a chayla asked me a shayla, could he lay Megillah early? If the Mechaber says you could, the halachos you could, you can't say different. You want to say wait, be chayish for the Pri Chodosh, that's up to you. But miyikid din, if need be, you could even lay in the Megillah, miboy join, but certainly it would be better to wait at least till Bein Hashmoshes. You start the davening itself. There's a beautiful Yisrael Sharash Avoida in Shari Beis Perek Gimel. He says, "B'chol yoyim v'yoyim tein loy me'ein berchoisav." One expression he says is by the bracha emes ve'amuna that we say in Maariv. There's so much about nisim that is the avodas hayoyim. So put more haydo atzuma into saying nis in the whole tefila of it. Yehu Hashem Alekeinu, the Bar Shemach, Habedeinu, Miyad Melachim, Hasam Nafshenu. He basically advises put more kavana into the bracha emes ve'amuna, because that's really the avodas hayoyim on Purim. Next question, bemis, is the hanisim. So unfortunately, hanisim is a bit underrated, because people think hanisim not makiv, big deal. So the emes is it is a big deal, and I'll prove it. It's Yedua, there's a chiyuv to be soimer gula tefila. Shema Nesra is right after God Yisrael, both Shacharis and Maariv. I was once in a shul, and the Gabbai, I don't know who he was, before they started Shema Nesra of Shacharis, he clapped on the bima and announced Ya'aleh v'yavai, Shacharis. And the next thing happened, which shouldn't happen, everybody started laughing. So that was a smichas gula tefila, they were laughing at the Gabbai. But it was taka funny, because he was inexperienced or clueless. Because even though, as we'll see, the minhag is to announce Ya'aleh v'yavai, that's only Maariv or Mincha, but not Shacharis. Now where's it coming from? So the emes of the Rashba in the Tshuva Chelik Aleph Reitzah the Gimel says a big chiddush. He says the minhag is to announce before Maariv, Shema Nesra. He says announce Rosh Chodesh, we say Ya'aleh v'yavai. But you see, you're allowed to announce the Me'ein HaMe'orah. The Chiddush is, even though Ya'aleh v'yavai on Rosh Chodesh night is not ma'akiv, but you still announce it. You be mafseh ben gula tefila. So the Rashba, but since tefillah avos rishus, so smichas gula tefillah is not worse, it's not better, whatever. So you're allowed to announce it, as I state in the Rashba. And then he says, Puk chazi, that's the minhag. And don't worry. And this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch Reish Lamed Vav Siv Beis. Now the chiddush is, even though Ya'aleh is not ma'akiv, so l'chayr we could assume hu adin Purim to announce hanisim, even though Purim is a notch less than Ya'aleh v'yavai. Why? Because Rosh Chodesh l'raisa. Hanisim is only Rabbanim, but it's good enough. Okay, the Marshal, so I don't, quoted by the Bach, I don't understand the Shulchan Aruch, I don't understand the Rashba. L'maisa, we hold today it's a chayv. And if you do it right. So why are you announcing? So he quotes the minig, bang, the shama should bang on the table, and like we do with clap eyes, and that should be enough of a reminder. Now, of course, the point is because the banging will do enough. But I must mention 2 points. Some have a different minig, and that is that the Gabbai, when he gets to the word Yalav Yava, he says it out loud. Now, that minig is not so pashut, even though the mashal does mention that. And the problem is because Lefei HaMelech of the Chazanish is inappropriate. Talking all of us, talking loud. Okay, if you do it once, it's a halbatzar. But I've seen a shul that many people do it. It becomes like a joke. Once I was in a shul, the person said Al Hanisim. He must have speed read, and it was so funny how he got there so fast. So that's distracting. So it has to be done with seichel. Now, another thing with seichel, I was once in a shul, I kid you not, and someone asked me, I said Yalav Yavi Maariv. I said, why'd you do that? So I'll tell you, it's funny, I don't know why. But the Gabbai banged, and I knew his Chodesh was last week. But if he banged, why is he banging? So I said Yalav Yavi. No, why did the Gabbai bang? It was December 4th or 5th, and they were starting the same Talamat bracha. So the Gabbai should have done is announce it, because some people are not connected to the Gaisha date, and they don't know he's starting at Talamat bracha. So banging just confuses people. Another at-risk time that maybe you should announce something is Maitzoi Pesach Yom HaRishayim. If you notice, the Maariv of Maitzoi Pesach, the first days, has 4 additions into the Shema Nesra. First of all, we don't say Mashiv Ruach, the same bracha for the first time, Atochen Atona, I forgot to mention, and Yalav Yav. So banging, people are not, again, so attuned to the same bracha in Baruch Aleinu. We haven't said it till now. But then again, what do you do? Only announce same bracha? So people think you don't say Atochen Atonu. Some told me the 8th is to bang 4 times, maybe. But something, it should be done that you cover all bases, because there are 4 different haisafas. Okay, that's as far as announcing by Shema Nesra. But the mere fact, Rabbi say, that the Rashba allows us to announce Yalav Yavai, and the Paiskim say Hu Adin Al Hanisim, shows that even if Haskara is not Ma'akiv, it's still important. L'maisa Purim, people are very focused. So if the Gabbai just bangs, it's probably enough. But the minig is today probably more often not to bang. The Kaf HaChaim writes the minig of Shalayim was not to announce it, just to bang. So whatever you do, make sure it works. As far as the actual Al Hanisim, so this is a Gemara in Shabbos Chav Dalit about mentioning Al Hanisim on Chanukah. But the Paiskim Oled, Machaba says it in Tafresh Peches regarding Chanukah, and Tafresh Sad Gimel regarding Al Hanisim. We say Al Hanisim night and day. The best thing would be, the way the Shulchan Shleima says not to forget, he says if you daven from a Siddur, you probably won't forget. I would just suggest it's a good idea, it works. Put something in the page of Al Hanisim or Yalav Yav, whatever it is, put a tissue, a card, something, and when you get to there, you'll say, oh, what is this? So it's a good reminder. And some people like to add that you take it out and you put it in your pocket. Why are you putting a tissue in your pocket? You Shema Nesra, leave it there. Because after Shema Nesra, you start saying, hey, did I say Yalav Yav? I'm not sure. What? If the tissue's in your pocket, no nervin. So you put something in in the Siddur. If you have 2 askaras, twice, Matzoi Pesach, you can put 4 tissues if you want, for some things. But the Maisa, it always works. If you did that, you won't have any sveikas. Next question is, when someone once asked me, happened I think 2 years ago, he forgot Al Hanisim. He started davening over thinking it's Ma'akib, and it wasn't. So what should he do? So he got to ask me after he stopped davening, and I was right. The Maimon Mordechai in Sivkot and Beis says, even though you started, but there's no purpose in finishing, the bracha is levatala. So stop right then and there, and say Baruch Shem if you want, and hope, Allah better for the next time you make a mistake. The next question is, someone forgot Al Hanisim, and he's holding right by the end of the bracha of Atoiv Shimcha L'chol Ha'Holos. What should he do? So this is clear. If he just said Baruch Atah without Shem Hashem, you go back and you start from Al-Nisim. You're going to have to repeat Hokel Yeshua Seinu. You're going to say the Kel again. Tafala. In fact, the Machabes Beferish, Tafresh Pei Ches, Tafresh Pei Beis, Aleph. If you left that Al-Nisim and benching, and you chap before the end of the Ala Koil, you go back Al-Nisim, even though you already said Ala Koil Hashem Elokeinu. You said two Shemas. But once you have to go back, you go back and repeat Hashem Elokeinu again. The big question is, if you said Baruch Atah Hashem and you chapped. Oh, I didn't say Al-Nisim. So what comes to mind is the famous Eitzah of Lamdeini Chukecha. Now, Lamdeini Chukecha is a Machab in Reish Vav, Sif Vav, where the Machab says that if someone made a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, and he chapped, oh yeah, I made a shakel already. So instead of just stopping, say Lamdeini Chukecha, which is a pasuk in Tehillim. How does that help? Because you convert it into a pasuk in Tehillim. There's no bracha levatol. If he said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu, it's too late. Now, Lamaisa, the Eitzah in itself is not so simple. It's not a perfect Eitzah. Because you start a Baruch Atah Hashem L'Shem bracha. How do you convert it to a pasuk in Tehillim? And I'll prove it to you. The Magen Avram in Kuf Lamed Hey, Sif Katan Ches says the following: if the Gabbai looks around, there's no kohen in the shul. So call for Yisrael, Fafalin, Ein Kam Kohen. Just then the kohen comes in. So Zok the Mechaba, Kuf Lamed Hey, let the Yisrael stand to the side, call up the kohen, and Yisrael gets shlishi. Let's say the kohen, the Yisrael started the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, and he chapped, or in that area, tell the kohen, too bad. Kahanim's reasoning, you come late, you lost Jaliyah. That's it. Question, why can he say Amdeni Chukecha and give the kohen? So the Magen Avram, even though he can say Amdeni Chukecha, Einay Nachain. What does it mean to say? Very pashut. If you say Baruch Atah Hashem as a bracha, you can't convert it into a pasuk Tehillim. It was a Shem bracha. If there's no other choice, that's the lesser of two evils. But that's why the Paiskim all say, Lamdeinu Chukecha is not an Eitzah. But Zok the Mishnah Brura, and that's his big chiddush in Bi'alacha Kuf Yudal at Sivav. Let's say you left out Mashav Ruach or Yala V'Yavai. They're both Ma'akiv. And you chap after Baruch Atah Hashem, you have no choice. Lamdeinu Chukecha and go back. Why do you do that? Because if you don't say Lamdeinu Chukecha and you finish the bracha, you have to repeat, and that's not good. Tainik Rav Moshe in Chelik Dalet Siman Tzaddik Gimel. How could you say Tehillim middle Shemona Esrei? You're telling me Baruch Atah Hashem Lamdeinu Chukecha middle of a bracha is saying Tehillim? So Rav Moshe argues, says better finish Hatoiv Simcha L'Hodos, and then what? Put it in between the brachas. Right there. Baruch Atah Mechaya Mesim, and right to say Mashav Ruach, even though it's not so perfect. So it's machlekes, which is the lesser of two evils. But here's the double pashut. According to this, it comes out that if he said Baruch Atah Hashem and chap, you didn't say Al Nisim, don't say Amdein Chukecha l'chol days, because it's not ma'akiv. When do you do the eights according to Bi'alacha? When it's ma'akiv. And Baruch Shekivanta, we said that the Sharatzian himself, Chavetz Chaim himself, Kuf Bei Ches, Yud Ches, he says the eights Amdein Chukecha is fine, but don't do it when it comes to Al Nisim. Yeah, whenever it's not ma'akiv. That means Rosh Chodesh benching or Maariv on Rosh Chodesh. So the same Mishnah advises on Davening Chukecha Eitzah. He says only when it's ma'akiv in the davening. So that's why Lamaisa, the halacha is, we said Baruch Atah, fine, Baruch Atah Hashem, finish, and we'll soon see the Eitzah put in a kind of tzor. I should also mention that the Mishnah says for the Pashit that if you did say Atoiv Shimcha L'Chon L'Hodos, don't put Al Nisim right there. because we'll soon to have a better eitzah, put it in a l'kayin tzar. Now, why taka? Interesting. Why taka could you say yalav yavai or mashruach in between brachas? It doesn't belong there. So it should be a hefsik. Zok the stipler in bracha Simon Yudches explaining what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mechabes is allowed to put it in bracha lebracha. This is the biggest tzarech of the tefila. If you're not going to stick it in, you have to repeat the Shema Esrei. So therefore, again, when it's ma'akiv, you put it in bracha lebracha. It's not a hefsik. When it's not ma'akiv, go weiter. This is clearly the halacha regarding the alanis. I should mention the Shara Tshuva and Taf Reish Pei Beis quotes the Radvaz that even alanisim you could put bein bracha lebracha because the Ma'aseh says it's shaykh to the previous bracha. But what can I tell you? We go to Mr. Berurah's psak and better go weiter. We'll soon see the next eight. The Welt says if you left out alanisim, put it into a l'kayin tzar. Where's that coming from? But the question is much deeper because alanisim, Zoktoisis in brachas Chav Dalid, Amar Aleph, alanisim is haido'o. You really don't need tais to say that. Look at the words. It's haido'o. How could you put it into l'kayin tzar that's bakosha? You can't put haido'o and bakosha. It doesn't fit. And the kasha is a wonderful kasha. So where do we get this idea from? So the emes is the Ramah in Taf Reish Pei Beis, Yivkat Aleph, quoting a kolboy that says, if you left that alanisim in benching, he's talking about benching. When you get to Harachamon, he has a special nusach that the Siddur has, who yasla alanisim, wonderful. The kolboy is talking about Chanukah. Zok the kolboy, v'chein yaseh b'Purim. Oh, so getting places. You left that alanisim either Chanukah Purim, put it into benching. But the question is, what do you say? So you'll ask people, say, what do you mean? You say alanisim and bimmei, right? Wrong. What does the Gabbai say? Harachaman. Why did he say to say harachaman? What the teretz is, because alanisim you cannot say in benching by harachaman. Harachamans are tfilos. Alanisim is haidah. It doesn't fit. So the kolboy, and that's the way the Mishnah Berurah's lashon is. You should say it b'toras tefila, b'tachanunim. When you convert the Bimmei Mordechai, Bimmei Matisyo, convert it into a tefillah b'harachamon, and then it fits into the rachamons. So we're not just putting alanisim elsewhere. We're changing its texture. It's a tefillah. Tefillah fits into the rachamon. And that's the Pashta Pshat. It's based on the Meiri and the Smag. You see a special tefillah. It's interesting, the Mishnah Berurah uses that lashon, you do it as a tefillah. Derech bakosha, like the Mishnah Berurah, and Sivkot and Dalet. Oh, so now it's Maaseh Midrash. Be'emes, if you left that alanisim, you cannot say alanisim l'kayin tzar. It doesn't fit in. What do you say? The same arachamon. Now it's tefillah mode. And then you could finish, bimmei, whatever it is. And the emphasis, the word harachamon, is the Shem Hashem. Hu yasalon anisim. That's Shem Hashem. And the biggest raya, I think, there's a famous kasha, the Bechor Shor, in Masechta Shabbos, Chaf Alf Mabeis, asked a kasha on the Mechaber. How could you say harachamon, hu yasalon anisim? Moshi's Laveseinu, not ask for an S. Can't down for an S. He has his teretz, it's a verabim, but what do you see from this? Harachamon is a tefillah, it's not a haidah. Once you turned it into a haidah, a tefillah, you could put it in the like Mishnah Berurah says, derech bakosha, into the elikayin tzar. Azoi vait that this is a bakosha, not a shevach. Rabbi Yashiv is quoted in the Ashrei Ish, Perik Mem, Sif Dalid, that if you left that alanisim on Shabbos, you can't say Rachman in l'kayin tzar. Why? Because you don't say Bakosha's Pratius on Shabbos. That's how much he considered it a Bakosha. Now, Grada I found, his Eidim, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in the Doilu Mashka, it's on Mereish Mem Aleph, Someone asked this kasha, how could you say Rachman on Shabbos? You can't add tefillas. Your Chanukah is always a Shabbos Chanukah. So Chaim said, Ein ze bakasha pratis. And it's not your private problem. This is Klal Yisrael's tefillah. So Lamaisa, the Eitzah is good, but has to be done right. You have to have a siddur in front of you. You see, benching, most benches have their Rachman. But if it happens on Shemay Esra, so turn to benching, a Rachman, and go back to Bimmei Mordechai or Bimmei Mattieu. Where do you put it in Lakai Netzar? So this is interesting. The Rabbi says, Koidim Yihilu Ratzain, you put in the Rachman. Mr. Bura is more specific. Acha Gemar Tefila, Derech Bakosha. The Shulchan Shleim, Rab Shlomo Levilna, Acha Tefila, in Lakai Netzar, put it in. So to make a long story short, the Paiskim seem to agree. You put it at the end of Lakai Netzar, before the second Yihilu Ratzain. If you say two Yihilu Ratzains, the guy always says only one at the end. But you say Lakai Netzar, or Yabakash, Psach Li B'Sar Asecha, that's very important. Don't forget Shuas, Purim, the Gemara says, and Masech Shabbos, Peiches, was Kabbalah SaTorah. In fact, I saw a Dava Pella. Some have the minhag that they don't say Tachnun on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, or Yud Gimel, Adar. So the simple reason is because that's the days you can lay Megila. The Shem Shmuel in Parashat Tzava says, another reason, because the 3 days before Purim are like Yishloishim Yakbala. Because it's Kabbalah SaTorah, Maris Meferis, Kimu V'Kiblu. The Mordechai says, Shakol Yom Purim, Kriyam Kabbalah SaTorah. No, there has to be a Yemei Yakbala. Whatever the case is, the davening should be with kavana, the psach, libi, and the atachayim. But at the end of Lakai Netzar, stick in harachaman hu yasalanu, and you continue with the nusach. Beautiful shaila. Someone who's davening slowly, he's taking Purim seriously, and soon they're going to be saying kedusha, Shacharis, or mincha. He makes a calculation, he's going to miss kedusha. But if he improvises and he skips hanisim, he'll make kedusha. What should be his priorities? Should one skip hanisim so that he'll finish earlier? He could say kedusha with the tzibur. So it comes to mind in cheshbin, it makes sense. Mr. Bura says in Kuf Chafei, kedusha deraisa. Hanisim, not even ma'akev. At most, drabanan, that's not ma'akev. So, yeah, sense of priorities. But then again, we have the Gemara Pesachim and Yuma, Ein Ma'avir Nala Mitzvahs. What are you jumping over mitzvahs? You're holding Shema Nesra, finish. First things first. But the Pella is, there's a extraordinary Radvaz, big Yisoid, Chedal Simon Yud Gimel. Someone asked him, he was in jail, and they gave him off 1 day a year to leave. Which day should from a year take off? So they start thinking, maybe Purim, Sumanisa, maybe Yom Kippur, and they had a shaila what to do. So Advaz says, these Paiskim, they were busy and they ended up with nothing. They made a silly mistake. Go out right that day. Why? Atach Metzena. Now you have a mitzvah, daven. Comes Purim, it'll be an oinus. Azoi zogt the Radvaz. And don't look at what's more or less important. That's your mitzvah. In fact, I should mention Rashi in my cotton daf tes. Kol mitzvah shebal liyotcha asay oisa bein gedoyla bein ketana val tanach ketana me gedoyla. We don't have a right to juggle mitzvahs, which are more important. So that's the Radvaz maskana. Go out the first day and enjoy daven like for a whole year. Now, I do know the Chacham Tzvi and the Tshuva Simon Kuvav, he has a different shita that what overrides Al Tach Metzena, a Tadeu Mekudesh, Gemara says in Zvachim, a bigger mitzvah overrides Al Tach Metzena. I mean, it's a shayla like Gabbai, Kiddush Levana, you say tonight, it's Shlach Levana, wait till tomorrow, a big sugya. But Rabbi say, someone once told me that the shayla what to do with Al Hanisim is telling the Machlekes Radvaz and the Chacham Tzvi. Should you take the first right away and say Al Hanisim, or better get the kedusha? But it's not true, because the Machlekes, the Radvaz and Chacham Tzvi is today you didn't start anything. Then the Chacham Tzvi maybe said, no, wait till Purim. But the middle of Shemini Esrei, you only have halanism to jump over what you have in your hands. Less man the polig, we don't do that. And Taka de Tzemach Tzedek in the Maloyim Simon Yud Aleph, the Krias Soda in Gimel Kuf Tes, he rather says, Ein lam mitzvah m'kaymu shaita, and he says, by the way, don't trust the prisoners, the prison guards. They'll tell you Purim time, they'll change their mind by then. He says, don't trust the guy, just go. That's his second chesed. Levushi Mordechai and Ma'adarov and Gimel Nuntes also says, the mitzvah is now, you do the mitzvah now. Question, true story, someone said al hanisim, but that was half the story. He concluded on Purim, biymei matityahu. I guess that was an early ad layoda. Bekitza, al hanisim, biymei matityahu. What's the shaila? And the truth is the same as Fakert. On Chanukah he said, biymei Mordechai. So it's a serious problem. And it's another around the year sugya. In the end of Siman Kuf Ches, the Mechaber speaks about someone said the wrong or unnecessary ma'ura. He mentioned Reish Chodesh and Davening, or Ritzei said it during the week. So the Mechaber says, basically, Nishkefel, made a mistake, not Makiv. So the Mishtabura quoting Roy V'Achroinim, he said, can't be. If you said, B'yoyim HaShabbos Hazeh, or B'yoyim HaShodesh Hazeh, it's a Sheker Muchlet. That's the Lashon the Mishtabura brings. Sheker Muchlet is not any better than saying words of hefsik. So, Dr. Mishtabura, when you said something that is objectively wrong, it's a hefsik. Start the bracha again. This is the psak that he says b'shem the derech hayim. Now the question is, how about our sugya? So let's dissect our sugya. He said al hanisim on Purim, so far so good. What was the only problem? B'matityahu. It's not a sheker muchlet. He's talking about a time of matityahu. What's wrong? So that's why the Paisim agree. That is okay b'diavad. Now I should mention, if he realizes the mistake afterwards, so put in Mordechai. You weren't yoitzi with matityahu, but it's not a hefsik. The Samas Chaim in Siman Shin Samach Tes says just that. Now we could add, I guess, a little more geschmack. The Taz himself says that some say you could say al hanisim on Tezvav Ador, some at Daminik, but we don't say al hanisim on Tezvav, only Yudalit. So Taz says, Archas Chaim, one of the Shayim says, what's wrong with saying it? And if you don't have to say it, and you said it, what's wrong? So the Taz, what do you mean what's wrong? If you don't say it, it's a hefsik, because it's not Purim anymore. See, but even that I could understand, because it was the raw, it is no longer Purim. But if you said, Biymei al hanisim on Purim, but you said matityahu, there's no sheker.
So it's a hefsik.
What?
It's a hefsik.
No, I hefsik. I praise Hashem for giving me a nes on Kadish Kislev. I'm Sipet Ramalma. It's not wrong. It's not. See, if you say B'yom HaShabbos Hazeh, that's wrong, or B'yom Rosh Chodesh Hazeh. Now, Lamaisa, I should mention all the places. Tazmog and Avram agree. Lamaisa. If someone said Al hanisim on Leil Tezvov after the Purim Suda, it's not a hefsik, because it's enough shaychis that's not sheker muchlet. In fact, some try to say it in Shtil Shemini Esrei.
So you started to see the time.
Yeah, no, Maariv. Okay, wonderful. So this is again another sugya of toyis, and that's really a big share for itself. But what's to get to us, we know very well. Next question, also a year-round shaila, and that is the kadish teskabel. When should it be said by Maariv? So the basic klal is teskabel is a very powerful kaddish. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, accept our tefillas. Typically, it's always said after a Shemini Esrei. Teskabel tzalaisa v'usa. Simple. The one time that we don't say it after Shemini Esrei is Shacharis every morning. When do we say it? After Uval Tzion. Why? Because kedusha the sidra is a very powerful thing we live on. Mara says in Saita Daf Mem Tes. So that's why we wait till after kedusha the sidra. In fact, the shliach tzibur, some shluchei tzibur don't step back 3 steps after Shemay Nesra. They rely on the kadish teskabel. Fine. Now the question is, one other time that we do say teskabel is after slichas, because slichas is like a mini Shemay Nesra. The question is, what do you do on Purim? Purim we have Maariv, Megila, at the kadish. When do you say the kadish teskabel? So the kavachayim in Tafrei Sad Gimel, that's the minhag of Svardim. We treat Purim night like a regular Motzei Shabbos. What do we do on a regular Motzei Shabbos? We say Chati Kaddish, Vol Tzion. Actually, we don't say Vol Tzion, at the Kaddish, and because it's night, we don't say Vol Tzion, at the Kaddish, and Tiskabel. And that's the minhag of Svardim. Some said Tiskabel twice, but the Magen Avram, and that's the Mishnah Berurah's psak, we don't do that. What we do is, we say, after Shemay Nesra, Kaddish Tiskabel, then we lay in the Megillah, then at the Kadish, and a Kaddish Shalom. Like a without Kaddish Tiskabel. It's like a Kaddish Yosef, same idea. There's one time in the year, to my knowledge, we do something like that, for a different reason. And that is Tisha B'Av. The Rama says, Taf Kuf Nun Tes Siv Dalid, that we say Shemay Nesra, Tisha B'Av night, then Tiskabel, then Eicha, then at the Kadish, and no more Tiskabel. But that's for a different reason. Because as the Mishnah Berurah explains, quoted the Goyis Maimoni, after you lay in the Megillah, Sasam Tfilasi, so then there's no Tiskabel. So Purim and Tisha B'Av have something in common, even though it's different reasons. But no doubt about it, the question asked is, why Taka don't we do like a Motzei Shabbos? Why don't we make Chatzi Kaddish, then Megillah, at the Kaddish, and then Tiskabel? Why do you have to make it Purim original? So I had such a know of the El Rabbi Sivkot Dalet says, listen to this, since the minhag was, they davened early Maariv on Purim, like we said earlier, but they couldn't start the Megillah till much later, Balayla, there's a hefsik. So you see how the Torah is geknipt and gebinden. A minhag of davening Maariv early affects the Kaddish Tiskabel. Today, maybe we should change. That's loiplug. So basically, this bazeh v'limud al zeh. Interesting question that has to be understood because it's very negeya. Typically, Purim is one of the longest Taniyah, Erev Purim, that is, Tanis Esther, usually it's much later than this year. This year, it's the earliest ever. But usually it's like around 8:15 till you finish the Megillah, till you get home. And the question is, why don't we have a 5-minute coffee break between Maariv and the Megillah? Now, you see, you can't eat before the Megillah, right? Okay, but we eat before Shaifa, many people before Shaifa. Once you have a snack and you have a Shema, what's the problem? And especially, again, it's a pretty long tinus. So here, the Yisoid is a Trumas Hadesh that I mentioned earlier. And he discussed the following. Someone's an honest ktsas that he can't come to shul to lay in the Megillah. He's sick in bed, he's homebound. So what should he do? To wait till the Balkara lanes in shul, comes to his house, he can't fast so long, he's always mensch. But then again, maybe he should eat, have a Shema, and lay in the Megillah. The first will lay in the Megillah at 10 o'clock, he's no rush. So no, you can't eat before the Megillah. What should he do? Better daven early, lay in early, like I told you, and then you're finished. Then he goes out, and then he goes to lane in the shul. What's the pshat? Why can't you have a snack and wait till later? We do it even on Shaifa. So the Trumas Hadeshin says beferish 2 reasons. First of all, if you're going to go into the Megillah and you're going to eat after a tainus, you're going to eat. You won't stop. You might forget the lane. But don't forget, we don't have a mitzvah. We go from tainus into a mitzvah. So if you're coming in fasting, you might forget the lane. It's especially this mitzvah, cheshuva like Megillah, that is doiche every other mitzvah. Mevatim Talmud Torah, Lishmaya Megillah, the Mechaber devotes a whole sif in Tafresh Pei Zayin, that there's no mitzvah that's doiche Mikra Megillah. You can't eat before this mitzvah. So it's a bit of a chiddush. At night you can't eat, right? And people drink by day before Shacharis. Why is that mutter? My day is a much bigger mitzvah. So the Levush says a lashon in the end of Tavei Tzadik Beis. Shegen tiknu likrias Megila koidim hachila. Shaloi yavoi levatola. It seems that it's a special din in chashivas of the Megillah. We don't eat at night before we laying the Megillah. The Rekeach has a famous Rekeach, Shin and Gimel. He explains, before you do a mitzvah chashuva, you have to fast. And that's how he explains the minhag of a chasen and kal tainis b'yom chupasa. So, like that, I could understand why night is more chama than day. Because by night, it's the first time you're doing it. That's the first time. Day, the second time. So even though the day is a bigger kriya, but it's still not the first time. So, Bekitza, Rav Shlomo Zalman, in Halichos Shlomo, in Hilchos Tefila, Amid, Reish Yudalid, writes, there was no woman in Yerushalayim that would even drink water before benching lulav, even on the rest of Yom Tov. That was the Zahiris of the Pashto Yidnas in Yerushalayim. We don't eat before mitzvah. So, be'emes, again, if someone feels he cannot lay in the Megillah, he's shvach, he's sick, the Paiskim say, Mishnah says it, the Chayodim says it, if he can't lay in the Megillah, let him eat first. A snack, with a Shema. You have a snack and a Shema, but you have to make sure you don't forget. But the rest of us, we go into the Megillah fasting. And I always felt it does more for the Megillah. You're coming in fasting instead of a full stomach, you feel like Ne'ilah of Yom Kippur. You know, Purim, Yom Kippurim, it just does a little more to give that effect. Now, Minsky Rebbe Zechariah Baruch used to say, he felt that the remez of this minhag, at the end of the Megillah, Divrei HaTzoymois, V'zakosam, Umayma Mordech, Umayma Esther, then they came to Maimah Esther. You have to go from the tainis into the Maimah Esther. That's the krias of Megillah. Whatever the case is, that the Chayodim says in Kuftan Hey Dalid, if it's a Tzar Gadol and he can't listen to the Megillah, let him eat a snack, and that's fine. That's right. Now, why we eat by day? Some don't even drink coffee before lulav or Megillah. But the minhag is to be makel, because once you had it by night, by day, already it's no longer fast, it's mutter. Aruch HaShulchan in Tov Reish Nun Beis Sifei regarding drinking before lulav says, even if you're makbid not to eat te'ima, but drinking is never asa. So people drink taka before Megillah and before the Daled Minim. Someone asked me, is there a hiddur for those that stand by laining to also stand by the Megillah? It's a very good question. Lamaisa, why do we stand by laining? Because the Torah was given be'ema, ve'yira, be'amida, but Grace Yid sat by laining. Darizal, Vilna Goyin, so it's not wrong to sit. So Aibazoi, if the reason of Amida, because of Kabbalah's Torah, doesn't apply to Megillah, it's a din in krias HaTorah. And that's why those that do stand by laining will typically not stand, don't have to stand by Megillah. I did see the Chasam Soif and the Tshuva, or Chaim Simon Aleph. It's something totally different context. He's talking about the mitzvah of Goimel. He says, Goimel, you have to stand. He quotes the El Yerabah. Why? Because Goimel is a form of Hallel. And Hallel, you say standing. Mimizach Shem Z'al Mevoyim, you know, B'oim the Beis Hashem, you say Hallel standing. As I state in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Hallel. So the Chasam Sofer throws in, Oy Bazoy, to come out, you have to stand by Megillah also. Because the Gemara says, why don't we say Hallel on Purim? It's one of the reasons, krias is Zuhi Lula. So he doesn't say much about that. But the Mishnah Yosef in Chelik Gimel, Sif Reish Lamed Hey says, from the Chasam Sofer and Haggis, it seemed he didn't stand either by krias of Megillah. It was just a kasha, he said, but not that halach l'maisa. So l'maisa, if you do stand, gesund hate, but even those that do stand by krias HaTorah, there doesn't seem to be a chiyuv to stand by mikra Megillah. Someone asked me about davening mincha, typically mincha, Maariv with a costume. He's collecting and it works out. So one thing we have to know, and this is important, as I told you, this Purim is a Kabbalah Satorah Dikidei. It's not a time for doing wrongdoings. The Be'alacha and Tafrei Tzadikei quotes Chayodam, if someone that drinks will miss even one mitzvah d'Rabbanan, he won't make a bracha, he won't do Sedayim, it wasn't Kedai. Purim has to be perfect, 100% Ish Yehudi. Lamaisa, we see how much tefila is. The Shibali Aleket, one of the Rishonim, he says the meaning of Ga'onim on Purim, listen to this, they would say Yoitzris, Slichas, and Tachnun. That's how much they were machshiv tefillah on Purim. Today if someone says Tachnun on Purim, Achaz Dosai, Mamishim. Mechazalaza in his Hanhagis, that Kam Shalom says he finished Shacharis Purim 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he didn't start 12 o'clock, trust me. It's a day of great tefillah. So if everything has to be perfect, certainly I will davening. But Lamaisa, Purim is a day that people dress up. Rav Vazna, in the Tshuva Chelik Yud, Simon Yud Ches, he says, if it's appropriate, in other words, he's wearing a Steinmal and Bekesha, or he's wearing a tie instead of a Steinmal and Bekesha, it's a Malbush, just not his. So it's cute, it's interesting, it's Purimdik, but if it's not outlandish, he says it's fine. Rabbi Yasha felt you shouldn't daven in a costume, that's quoted, I saw in the Yavakish Mipiu, but basically, if the davening is good and the costume is not, outlandish, distracting, probably the minhag is to be makel, taka people do step into a mincha. But certainly, last but not least, the most challenging is the mincha and Maariv after someone drank, which sometimes is inevitable. He drank, had a suda, and mincha Maariv, how do you work that out? So this is another big sugya. In fact, it's a whole simon in Simon Tzadik Tes. And to make a long story short, the Mechaba begins and put things in perspective. Shasa yayin kedei revius al yispalo. A revius is between 3 and 4 ounces. Now forget about Purim. Typically a person makes kiddush before tekiyas and has a little bit of cake and davs musaf. I drank revius. People daven mincha doyle after the Shabbos Yom Tov Suda. Shabbos Yom Tov, we all divide the Suda, run to mincha, come back, mincha, he's made kiddush. People Chassidim that have a longer Rosh Hashanah, they run right from a Suda to mincha. I mean, there's so many times that we go from revius to davening. So again, it's a big sugya, but to make a long story short, which they gave us on Purim, the Mechaba in Sif Gimel does add, same Sif, Simim, Sif Gimel, influence of wine depends on the person. Some people that drink a lot, they can drink 2 revius, it doesn't make a dent. So it's not a problem. Then he says, also it depends on the wine. Could be the halacha of revius yayin, that Gemara says shouldn't daven, you can't paskin, you can't duchen, so you have 3 halachas. Their wines are much stronger than ours. And don't forget, their wines you don't make a bar piyagaf unless you diluted it. So the Ramah is like saying, first of all, he says, our wines are not so stark. Also, if you know you can handle it, and probably we can handle it because we have weaker wines. Zakti Ramah, maybe that's another tzad l'hakam. Then he throws in another yisoid, the kolshkein im mispalalim b'toich siddur shebiyadei. Because the whole problem is you're going to get confused, you're going to get say the wrong word. If you have a siddur guiding you, what's the problem? Now, Dr. Moshe does not say it so simple like he does it in Ramah. Yilav the mistapina, I would say maybe a siddur helps, but it's only miyashav the minig, so it's a bit di'eved, but a siddur does help keep you on target. The Hagoyis Maimini in Hilchos Tefillah Perek Dalet Halacha Chaf throws another tzad to be makel after drinking, which is sort of a concession. Today our kavana is shvach as it is, so you can't lose much by davening when you're drinking. Very shvach b'di'evet. The Yam Shashleima says a beautiful yisoid that mamash fits Purim. In Beya, Perek Bey's Siman Hay, he has our kasha. How could you go from Suda to Mincha? You drank a revius. So he says yisoid that Chazal asked it going from revius of wine to Mincha when it's not a Suda's mitzvah. So you have to have priorities. You want to daven? Drink afterwards. Don't drink before davening. But if you're coming into the davening with a shtiyah shel mitzvah, Shabbos, Yom Tiv, Simcha, then it's not a stira. And here's an incredible thing, which is a mitzvah lefarsim. He teaches the Medrash. Medrash teaches the pasuk, "Avani tfilas l'cha Hashem eis ratzon." Zok the Medrash is not a text. The Medrash says this. Look at the difference in a yid and a goy. A goy gets shikah, and what does he do? Drunk driving, fatalities, terrible. A yid gets drunk, what does he do? He drinks, he comes to shul, he davens, and Purim he's crying, he doesn't say it, but Purim he's crying by Atachaynen and the Avar Soilam. So he says that regarding Yom Tiv, that you're coming from a mitzvah, it enhances the davening. And I was thinking, halachos kama v'chama after Purim. You know, it's a kiddush Hashem, oyim v'noyrim ma'oid. You go to Babiv, Shem Shabbos, Rabbi Leander Shul and Flap, all the shuls packed with people davening. People coming from the Suda, a lot, drank a little bit, are high, not high, but the davening is such a kvod shemayim, ein l'shayiv, ein l'tayir. But it has to have a cheshbon. You see, the Mechaber says, a revius, you can't daven. The poskim say, okay, you could daven, you have a siddur, today is different, yen is different. But as the Mechaber says, when someone drank, and is ein yochel daven fnei HaMelech, Filasei to'eva, Gil oiva by desara, state the more in brachas. So the Achashulchan, why by desara? That's pashit. If you believe you're oim l'fei HaMelech, so we pass such a davening. I was once in a shul grada, and there was a shtir tzibah davening, and there was no suffix, you're not allowed to answer amen to his brachas. When he finally finished, he was totally out of control. If you can't be l'fei HaMelech, you can't daven. What should he do? Wait. Hopefully before Chatzos, you'll be able to daven like a mensch. If you can't, wait till after Chatzos. Okay, Krishma is a problem, but you can't daven as a shikah. And that is halacha l'maisa. The only chiddush that we said till now was when he drank more than revius, but it's yochel dafei. In other words, there are really three categories: revius, yochel dafei hamelech, and any yochel dafei hamelech. But when someone knows what he's doing, and he says, "I could do it," and he's having a siddur, and it's close to Chatzos, this is hat to be mekel. Shmuel Kamenetz says, if people ask me, am I Lefnei HaMelech? Probably they are. If you have enough foresight to ask that question, you probably are. But the point is that Purim has to be a davening. Again, a little allowance that is the Suda, a little freilichkeit, the davening in the yeshiva, right, that minyan before Chatzos, Matzah Purim, is an incredible davening. The Olam is davening, mamish, like a Yom Kippur. But if it's ein yochel daven fnei HaMelech, better don't daven. Now, Mr. Brewer says, if someone drank knowing he's going to miss davening, so there's no tashlumin. That's a pesheya. Someone asked me once, a week before Purim, what's the halachos making tashlumin for my davening I missed? I says, not yet. You're not a pesheya. You are a pesheya, not an oinus. There has to be a cheshbon. So the only heter that we're saying is between a revius until ein yochel daven fnei HaMelech. But more than that, chas shalom to daven. Now, I heard from Rabbi Steif's Einikel said that his Zayda, Rabbi Steif, Tzadik Moed, his minhag was to bench every benching, even b'yachidus halachos, even during the week. That was his minhag. And he drank revius, and he always went to sleep right afterwards. Because you can't paskin, it's very Gemara, based on a paskin the Torah. You can't paskin if you had a revius. And I should mention that because people ask Rabbanim Shailas, Purim night, Leil Tezvav, you shouldn't do that. Some hold it's a deraisa to paskin if you had a revius of wine. So choose the right person that knows, that didn't drink. And let me just leave one final thought. You look at the Maariv of the minhagim, you see the whole Suda was revolved around being able to daven Maariv properly. Look in Purim Tezvav. In fact, the Noyek Hatzayin Yosef, it was written Tov Ayin Ches. He writes that their minhag was that they had a Suda, they benched, daven Maariv, and then they drank. People, what about Ad Lo Yoda? Ad Lo Yoda is not Shechiv today. But more than that, he says, the Chiv goes on that night. The Levush says, Yemei Purim is going on 2 nights and 1 day. Shemadesin said that if someone's mazik on Purim Mispata, it goes on Leil Tezvav. So if someone thinks he can't do it, that's a better eitzah. Bench al hanisim, then Maariv without al hanisim, and then drink. But the ikka is Yemei Purim Taka. We should realize we need tefillas. We should be Zoich HaRachman who Yasla al hanisim on the flois. Kasha Osla Veseinu Bayamaheim Bizman Azeh Afreichem Purim to you all.
Shem Egen Shir Terlak Gabbai Shekach to our Smith for today's shir. But Anya Ben Akashem Motzigers Bokel Zakis as Yisrael of Figure Hebron Torah Mitzvah Shenem Al Anoi Chofetz Aman Tzidke Yagdol Torah V'Yadeh. Okay, Rabbi said, whoever was sleeping during the share, we're having a sikkim on the Purim davening. You know who you are.
Okay, a special koyach of tefillah, that's the essence of Purim. Mikash kimiga gadol shalay alakim kroiv meilov. A chayla who cannot daven bizman is allowed to daven Maariv with al hanisim and need be even laying the Megila. Certainly in Bein Hashmashos, as we said, the early Rosh Chodesh does say Yalav Yavai. This somehow the Yalav Yavai and al hanisim is connected to the Maariv. The emes amuna bracha we should say with more kavana, especially this year. We see the sakana that's in Eretz Yisrael. Ein Chanami, even though al hanisim is not ma'akiv, it's a very important part of our davening. But you try to squeeze it in either before you finished. You could say it and go back and say it in the right place, or you could say it in the end of davening alakayin itzar, or in benching a special arachaman. Yikadin, you're allowed to announce any haskara. The minhagim, for some reason, we don't announce most things, but whatever's necessary, or when necessary, you're allowed to actually announce, not just bang, but announce. Person that baruch atah, go back to al hanisim, baruch atah Hashem. Do not say amden chukecha. You should not put it bein bracha lebracha. That's the mishburas psak. At the end of lakayin itzar, it says a rachaman, and then he says biymei, whatever is necessary. If benching, you make a special rachaman, and then you could say biymei, whatever is necessary. We don't skip al hanisim to be able to say kedusha, each in its own place. Someone said b'matasyo instead of b'mei Mordechai, or vice versa, is yoytze b'diavad, but try to squeeze it in, the right thing. We don't put the al hanisim in between bracha lebracha. Like I said, if you said al hanisim on tezvav adar yoytze b'diavad, it's still a shtickle shaychus of the day. The Ashkenazim say teskabel after Shema Esrei and kadish shalom without teskabel after kadish. The eating before the Megillah should only be done when absolutely necessary. By day, the minhag is to drink before the Megillah. We don't have to stand by Megillah, even though you stand by krias HaTorah. Davening with a costume, if it's appropriate, is fine. The halacha urges that every mitzvah should be done properly. It has to be a kimu v'kiblu, so drink and make sure Maariv and benching will be done properly. Try to daven before chatzos, and don't ask a Rav Shaila if he's not appropriate. And Nevada, we should hope to see Nisim, especially in our times. My voice is not getting better. Give me a bracha.